So we can record all those lazy people.
All right.
So we can record for all those lazy people that are not showing up on time. We don't want them to miss the thing.
And now there's a record of it, right? So, anyway, welcome to Megan's book launch for Straight into Darkness, and it now has a new subtitle on Petty's mysticism, which is what I'm going to talk about. But anyway, I have my original first edition Straight into Darkness here, as opposed to the University of Georgia Press version, which I did read at, to compare the differences, and it's mostly in the introduction where it's different, but of course it has to be, because this was written while Tom was still alive, and obviously the one picked up by University of Georgia Press is now more of a memorial volume. Well, I mean, it's mostly the same. Anyway, I'm excited about this. The American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought, I believe, inaugurates a new series of book launches with this particular. I never had the idea. Tim and Megan said, hey, why don't we? And so now the fellows of the AIPCT, when they have a new book, we'll do a book launch. And if anybody else who's a regular attendee of our functions wants to do a book launch, there's no reason why we can't, because these things are easy these days, whereas they used to require all kinds of preparation, right? So anyway, I welcome our presenters who are here as well, and I'm going to give Megan the first opening salvo, and then we'll move to Daniel. So with that, Megan, take it away. Hello.
Hey. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited that we're all here in the grand sense of, like, we're in the same time and place, but just all of us being alive on the planet at the same time. Now and then I try to check in on the feeling of awe that is supposed to accompany that. And Petty is someone whose work has always helped me to check in on that feeling of awe. And so I'm delighted to offer this book kind of in service to the legacy of things he cared about. I'm also delighted to be working with the people that agreed to participate on this panel. For Randy, he and I co-edited Tom Petty and Philosophy, the anthology, together. And so that was a lot of fun. And the reason that we have been able to collaborate so frequently over the years started at the root with our mutual love of Tom Petty. So that was the first thing we ever worked on together, and we've been working together ever since. So that Tom brought that relationship to my life is really cool. Daniel got the invite to be here because he did a really cool breakdown of the Wallflowers album that I really admired. So just as a journalist, I respect his work. And that came to me again through Tom Petty, because Daniel and I both write occasionally for Pop Matters. We're on staff there together, although this is the first time we've ever had the opportunity truly to collaborate. And the reason I got that gig working for Pop Matters is because I cold pitched to them something that had to do with Tom Petty. And that was the first article Pop Matters ever published of mine, like a decade ago. So Tom brought me that relationship as well. And then Joel Selvin ended up here, not because we have any mutual affinity for Tom Petty, but because his work on concert going as a phenomenon after years and years of reviewing, and then particularly the work that he did, the research that he did for the Altamont book that he wrote, really influenced my thinking about the work of Tom Petty. And he was just generous enough to provide his time and insight to this. So everybody that's here is here because of their own love of the man and the band. And then also it just connects us to other people. So I'm really pleased that we could do this. And the part of the book that I would like to share with you is just some of the introduction. So I'll just read it to you, then you'll know what the book's about. And then these folks are gonna provide some commentary on their interpretation of what all I wrote in the book and how it connects to their own life, or whatever type of response that they want to give to it. So here's a bit from the introduction for you, just 5 or 6 minutes worth. No way around it. I was once carrying so much physical chronic pain that I got near to jumping off a train platform, but I didn't, because Tom Petty's Straight into Darkness came through my headphones. So this little book examines why. The number of good books about Petty can be counted on one hand. Most of them are properly researched journalistic enterprises that shy away from too many critical maneuvers, like examining the nitty-gritty of his word choices or arguing about whether his work is kind to women. None of them much illuminates the nature of a personal connection between the author and subject, and none of them explicitly dips a toe into any philosophy. I hope that the form and content of what I'm doing here stands for something that is new, and I'm sure a lot of folks will not like it. All right. The uncertainty and distaste for innovative approaches to a beloved thing. There are lots of salvation songs in this world, and even many others in the Petty catalog to which countless strangers have given their allegiance. But as I stood over those train tracks, preparing to surrender to disease and despair and the psychedelic blindness of my own simple human misery, the one song out of hundreds of available Heartbreakers tracks that came through my headphones at that one perfect moment was Straight into Darkness. And I've built my life around this epiphany, so it seems like a decent thing to build a book around too. And at least you know that I mean what I say, and you can believe me because of the debt that I owe to the song. It has to be paid forward. It cannot be paid back. Just as I was finishing up writing these essays in the fall of 2017, Tom Petty died. And the first thing I thought to myself was the same thing that Jerry Garcia is rumored to have said when Pigpen died. That fucker, now he knows. At first, nobody was sure Petty had really died. There was another time that the celebrity gossip press declared him dead, and it wasn't even true. In this round, my newspaper students actually scooped me on it, and I did pause long enough to be proud of them before starting my morning journey. It was confirmed that he was taken off life support, but not actually that he died. And so I fell asleep on Atlanta time that night while Petty was playing Schrodinger's cat in Los Angeles. Of even the most basic facts with Petty, you could never be totally certain. And he really liked that about himself, I'll bet. I wouldn't exactly know because we never met, and now, at least in this lifetime, we won't. But Petty is possessed of some of that type of fan who has advanced beyond mere biographical litany to a space of psychoanalysis and ultimately commiseration that borders on a lifetime parasocial partnership. I mean, like prophets have. And he seldom capitalized on that, even though he could have been an out-and-out preacher alongside Bruce Springsteen if he had wanted. He just kept his head down, always working, to a point where, despite the uncertainty generated by his own ornery personality, the steadfastness of his labor was mythic. He was a happy Sisyphus. From an active band's perspective, Petty basically picked a great time to go, 1 week after the wrap of his 40th anniversary tour, a victory lap if ever there was one. His ideas for the re-release of Wildflowers on record, enough for the launch to go as he wished it when the dust settled. His revival of Mudcrutch, including a surprise hit single. Honored a few months prior as MusiCare's Person of the Year for his decades of charitable work, and loved by his wife Dana for so long at the mystical, round, rock and roll age of 66 years old. Before his death was confirmed, it was reported that a hospital chaplain had been called to the room earlier that morning, as Petty was not expected to live through the day. I find the provision of this one detail so extraordinary. Petty was stone cold guarded on issues as private as his religion, although he was vaguely known to favor meditation. Even the simple acknowledgement of a chaplain's presence feels thick with implication. But please, do not go getting all sad that the man has died as you read through these essays. I sure was hoping Petty would get to read this book, and maybe but his death changes no part of what I have to say about the man's life's work. As Camus said, if this myth is tragic, that is because the hero is conscious. Sisyphus, proletarian of the gods, powerless and rebellious, knows the whole extent of his wretched condition. It is what he thinks about during his descent. The lucidity that was to constitute his torture at the same time crowns his victory. There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn. So somebody else can do the chronological summary. Somebody else can do the rundown of Petty's legacy in the music industry. Whatever you came here looking for, I wish you luck in finding it. And you are welcome to skip around in this book. Each essay is a self-contained unit, but the essays are also sorted into 6 tools for approaching the song. Personally, musically, historically, rhetorically, sociologically, philosophically. The 5 chapters on the band's 40th anniversary tour comprise my thoughts on the challenge of wanting to hear my song at a show. Spoiler alert, never did. But I did learn to play it myself, which is covered in the section on song composition. You don't need to know a lick of music theory in order to enjoy this book. The 3 chapters on album context provide a condensed version of the Heartbreakers' history as a background to understanding the creation of Long After Dark and the place of Straight into Darkness within that album. The 7 chapters on lyrical analysis go through each and every word of the song to get through its many meanings. There are 3 chapters on Mob Scene for a sociological and psychological examination of the band's concerts, with a close look at the role of violence and mysticism. Then 3 chapters on Standards evaluate the philosophical implications of the song as they pertain to individualism, transcendentalism, and absurdism. There's also some good stuff in that section for fans of Bob Dylan and the occasional whiff of Bruce Springsteen. Overall, I've been neck deep in the philosophy of Tom Petty for years now, so my intention in writing this book is more or less that it provides a way to preach the gospel that he taught me. Number one, don't believe the good times are over. Number two, don't believe the thrill is all gone. Number three, real love is our salvation. And fourth, the strong will carry on. Those are the four things he taught me that ultimately saved my life. Each lesson can be traced back to a line in the bridge verse of Straight into Darkness. And done in any number of ways, I could have ended up working on this book the whole rest of my life, right? Over thousands and thousands of pages. And hell, I suppose that's what I am actually living out and doing anyway. But that is between me and my rock and roller. There is so much more, of course, but I lived it, and I can write about it until the second coming of Tom Petty, and you still won't understand what the heck I'm talking about until you pony up for the experience of it all yourself. To live by his example, because rock and roll is a church, and Tom Petty was one of my priests. He was a spiritual gangster, and then he died. He went straight into darkness, and I am still here, very much alive. So that's a chunk of the introductory section of the book. And now Randall is going to do us the fine service of moderating the remainder of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. So I'm going to moderately hand it over to Daniel for his bit and express our joint appreciation for his presence and effort. Go ahead, Daniel. Please say a little bit about yourself. Megan already said something about you, but yeah, so just a little introduction.
Thank you again so much for having me here. Can you hear me all right? Everything good? Cool. Well, yeah, I'm a music journalist. Write for Pop Matters. I've been writing for Pitchfork, resident advisor. I was with Spectrum Culture for a very long time. Just had my first piece on Stereo Them. So yeah, I'm sort of piecing things together right now. Got into music. I didn't listen to music until I was about 12. I have a lot of sensory integration issues that kept me from listening to music. Early in my life, music would really sort of freak me out and set me off. And it wasn't until I was about maybe 11 or 12, initially through the magic of the Romanian boy band Ozone, and then through the Beatles, that sort of got me to realize, how wonderful music was. And I think I've been spending the rest of my life sort of compensating for that. Started out, as a classic rock kid, listening to what my dad listened to basically. And then as I got a little older, I started getting into weirder shit that my dad wasn't necessarily into. And now, I listen to all sorts of things, but I think fundamentally, there really is a place, for 70s, 80s rock, in my heart. And I still love Tom Petty very much. And so I wrote about wildflowers for Pop Matters, which is how I signed on to this thing, which was a really fascinating experience and which ties with what I wanted to talk about from the book, which is in the analysis of the second chorus of Straight into Darkness, in which the first two words, we went straight into darkness, those two words are eliminated. So it's no longer about, this individual, either the little girl in the first verse or the band in the second. So now it's everyone. It's, everybody's going straight into darkness, and that elimination of those two seemingly insubstantial words, really makes the huge difference. And I thought that it was really fascinating to see Megan, word by word analyze the song, especially from a songwriter like Petty, who's very, a lot of his phrasing is very simple, but very fraught with meaning. And that, as a Beatles, as someone who's, you know, uses the Beatles as a starting place. And I think this is something that Megan talked about too, that sort of, that British style of songwriting and the influence of groups like the Beatles. It's like, I find that to be the kind of songwriting that is the most moving to me personally, is writing that is, the words, the language is very simple, very idiomatic, but it's very charged with meaning, and, rather than things that are very hyper specific, which I feel is sort of the dominant school of songwriting, I would say right now, 2010s, 2020s, is this really kind of hyper specificity. You can see it in Drake, you can see it in, a lot of contemporary indie rock songwriters. But I really sort of am more moved by things that are, simple, and thus can have like, a lot, can be very charged with, a lot of different meanings. And that's really what I like about Petty. So, by eliminating these two words, it's like you might not seem like much at first, but it really makes a world of difference. And that's something that I noticed when I was writing about Wildflowers, about the box set. I'd loved that album for a very long time. It's one of my all-time favorite rock albums for sure. And you have all these demos, you hear Petty working the songs out, just him and the guitar, and trying to figure out what would come on the final album. And this, to me, feels like a very, it's a very personal album to him. It's, he's really kind of going through, it's what's on his mind as he's about to go straight into darkness, into this uncertainty. He recorded this album right before he split with his wife, right before he would become addicted to heroin, which lasted for, I forget how long, but for a few years. And so this is sort of, an album being written by a person who's, whose life is about to change, is about to shatter, in a very, very meaningful way. And I feel like there's kind of this myth that I, as a writer, personally kind of take a lot of pleasure in trying to dispel, which is this idea that personal, art that is personal, that is, really from the dark night of the soul, is somehow, transcends artifice, and art is somehow apart from art, is somehow above art. And to me, that seems really disrespectful to art, because, as if to imply that art is somehow frivolous, And it's like this writing to create this album that is so uniquely devastating, and that's true of Wildflowers, and that's true of that's true straight out of darkness, straight into darkness as well. And I think it's true of any, true of most art, is, if you're gonna make a song that's really devastating, that's really emotionally powerful, something that, if you're gonna communicate how you're feeling to the world and have them feel that with you, there's really an art to it. You don't just, it's not just, oh, if you're really feeling something, you don't magically step up to the guitar or to the microphone and just make a masterpiece. It doesn't work. Sometimes you do, maybe, but that's very rare. That's, the exception to the rule. And seeing these demos, seeing Petty work these songs out, really kind of made me realize, as a songwriter, these little things in this, this very sort of, what will seem at first like very kind of simple writing, really how profound these minor differences can be. The thing that really struck me was Crawling Back to You, when I heard the initial version of the song, which I think on the chorus he says, coming back to you. At first, he doesn't come to that word crawling yet, which is such a delightful image. You see this sort of weak man, coming into the light, it's like. And the other thing that really struck me is there's this verse where he talks about we got into a barroom fight and then an Indian shot out the lights. And then he initially had this other verse where he was sort of, we escaped to Birmingham in a U-Haul van with a 5-piece band. And you have that verse before he gets to what I think is really kind of the, you know, the thesis of not just the song, but, you know, it comes at the climactic point in the whole Wildflowers album where he says, I'm so tired of being tired. Sure as night follows day, the things I worry about never happen anyway. Which is a line I think about a lot. And, you know, initially there's a solo, there's all this other shit that comes before he gets to that. And really, you know, he cuts like 2 verses out. And then you get, you know, the lights being shot out, which, you know, on top of being a great image, I think there's a good chance that that's a reference to Shoot Out the Lights by Richard and Linda Thompson, which is one of the great divorce albums, you know, and then here he is, he's about to get a divorce. So I thought that was kind of clever and cool, and sort of a, you know, also a sort of a worrying, you know, indication of, you know, what was going on in his head at the time. But, you know, it's still, I never really expect that to come after that, you know. The lights are shot out, you know, the scene ends basically. It's like, it's very cinematic. It's like, you know, that's the end of the scene. And then you get this really just incredibly open and vulnerable thought, you know. He's like really kind of finally saying in the song what he really is thinking the whole time. Which I love in songs like that, where they kind of just, you know, all of the metaphor, all of the kind of, you know, it all just goes away and they say what they really think. You know, another great example of this for me that always moves me is in the This Must Be the Place by Talking Heads. You know, there's a lot of kind of imagery and, you know, metaphor, and then finally says, you know, I'll love you till my heart stops. And it's like, okay, here's what he's really thinking. And that's very, very powerful. And I think Petty does the same thing with that line. And, you know, in order for that to have the impact that it does, Petty had to realize somewhere in the process of writing the song that, you know, those extra verses, they have to go. You know, I'm sure he, you know, he labored over them. I'm sure he was very sad to see it go. I mean, that's, you know, the thing for any editor, you know, to make that decision is always very difficult, you know, to be like, here's something that has, you know, some value to me, but, you know, in order to make this song really do what I want it to do, you know, it has to go. And he made the right decision, because that subject change, you know, is really what makes that song so brutal to me, and what makes it so true, you know, to what I call in my review the rhythms of loneliness, you know, where, you know, you can be having a casual conversation and then, you know, you open up to these declarations of need that are potentially very embarrassing, you know. And, you know, when I talk to people who are really going through shit, that's kind of what I experience too, you know, and same with me, you know. Sometimes you'll be having a kind of casual conversation and then someone will just let slip something that's just very, you know, very, you know, potentially embarrassing, something that's really, you know, from the heart. And, you know, one way to think of that is to think like, you know, here's something that Petty ripped from his soul, you know, and, you know, but there's, you know, as a songwriter, you know, as an editor, as an artist, you know, it's not, it doesn't work like that, you know. It's, if you want to have a song move people, you know, there's an art to that. And I think what Megan does really well in this book is to, by really looking at this very powerful song, very powerful but written very simply, is to kind of to show how, you know, in order to get across what a songwriter is feeling, that songwriter really needs to, you know, there's an art to it. And oftentimes that's an art of elimination. You know, these 2 very simple words, they go, you know, he takes them away and it becomes a completely different meaning. And, you know, it works, it builds, the song builds to it. Initially, you know, it's these very specific stories. And then here it is, it's the whole world, you know, the scope of the song. By taking these 2 words, the scope of the song expands from the personal to the whole fucking universe, you know. And it's, that's what I love about Petty, and that's what great songwriting is about. I think that's all I got to say.
All right. Megan, do you want to do responses here, or?
No, I just want to say thank you, Daniel. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I've never heard you like speak before. I mean, I've heard some of your music and I've read a bunch of your writing, but I've never just had the ability to conversate with you before. So that was lovely for me in ways that you can't imagine. Thank you.
Thank you for having me so much. Thank you for this awesome book.
All right, then. I guess we'll move on to Joel Selvin. And Joel, tell us a little bit about yourself, although there's a lot to say. But yeah, what we need to know for today.
Well, I danced at the Fillmore to the Grateful Dead while I was under the influence of LSD. That's kind of where I started. I've been listening to the radio, but I served at the San Francisco Chronicle as their pop music critic for 36 years, and I've written a bunch of books. Megan did one of my favorite reviews of any of my books on the Altamont book. She really got into it, and so I'm connected to Megan in ways that you can't understand until you get a reviewer's response that's as deep and earnest as hers was. And I'm working on a bunch of books right now, 3 of them in various stages of, and a 4th one's coming out in October, which is my Sly Stone oral history. There's some scary stuff. And Patty and I go back all the way. I covered his first Bay Area appearances. He played at a club called Keystone Palo Alto for 3 nights, and then moved up to Keystone Berkeley for a couple more nights. And San Francisco Underground, or they weren't underground by then, but the FM radio station of choice actually was sitting on the album. They liked it and they were playing it, which was like the only station in the country that was playing it at that point. So there were a few people there to see him. American Girl, wow, the whole thing was pretty impressive. And they gained a kinship with San Francisco. So they kept coming back, and I saw him, I don't know how many times, just, amazing shows. In 79, when Bill Graham closed Winterland, he loaded up the last week and brought in Springsteen for his very first general admission show. And Bruce just tore the place down. And 2 nights later, Petty came in, and I think they closed their set with about a 10 or 15 minute version of Shout with Tom surfing the crowd. It was phenomenal. And then the next night, the Dead closed the place, and it was all over for Winterland. Of course, I saw him with Dylan. That was a kind of dubious enterprise, but I know they had a good time doing it. And Dylan was into borrowing people's crowds at that point because he really couldn't sell enough tickets on his own. That's when he moved over and borrowed the Dead's crowd for a run. And of course, all the Fillmore shows were. Okay. The Fillmore shows were, I did about 30 shows in 2 months. I think I was about 20 of them, at least a portion of them. And that was where the band really remade themselves. They'd done like 3 years of touring all the hockey rinks and basketball arenas. And they were super aware of the burden they were putting on their fans. Big money tickets, parking lots, a lot of effort to get there. So they made sure that they played all the crowd favorites and hit all these spots. And once they got on tour, they played the same set list night after night after night after night. And they got sick of it. So they blew out for a year. And it's really it was up in the air whether they were going to get back together when this Fillmore idea came up. And they came up and sat down with Fillmore, and they played what they wanted to play. They were making up songs on the spot. They were doing Mary Jane's Last Dance every night, and it was stretching out to 10, 12 minutes. Lots of things from, old Zombie songs and old Booker T's and old Ventures numbers. And over the course of their run at the Fillmore, they rediscovered their bliss. And that was an amazing turnaround for the band. Now, you mentioned Springsteen in regards to Patty, Megan. I had the opportunity, I think it was about 2010, to see Patty close the New Orleans Jazz Fest on Saturday and Springsteen on Sunday. And it was an extraordinary comparison. Tom was up there with his 5-piece band with one extra guy. Springsteen had more horn players than the original E Street Band. And he still couldn't elevate that stage. He still couldn't, it didn't matter how many voices and instruments, it was just slogging through. And, I sent a note to Bob Lefsetz after I saw that and told him that Springsteen sounded like Up With People. And Lefsetz thought that was so hilarious, but he also thought that I would be the target of such hostility that he quoted me anonymously, and it still just poured in. What do you mean Up With People? But the day before, Tom had been there, and he connected with every person in that 50,000 plus crowd on a personal basis. And that's what Bruce couldn't do. And what he was trying to do, he was play acting that. And for Tom, it was so genuine. I believe that was the last time I saw him. His last show in the Bay Area. I was out of the Chronicle by then, so I didn't. No, I saw him at Outside Lamps too. But the last show was at the Greek Theater. It was just a week before he died, and the reports were really sad, really sad. He couldn't sing very well. He was obviously weak in condition, and the reports coming back were really pretty dire. And then a couple days later, it's like, wow. But Tom was just folks. He really was the most rock star you'd ever want to know. He was all about the music. He was all about the old records. It was all about the traditions and the lore that he was carrying on, and his life was embedded in those things. And he was so adept at explaining what he was doing and what the band was up to. Interviews with him were always like, a baseball writer in the locker room afterwards, because he knew when he had his stuff, and he knew where the strike zone was, and it was always just right away under the hood, no pretense, and no rock star BS. So I love those guys, and the band, by the way, the rest of the guys in the band follow suit. I mean, Ben and Mike, those guys are just as at home and at ease. Ben's been jamming at some club in Hollywood for the last couple of years on like Wednesday nights, and nobody's paying any attention. I think there's a bunch of session players that stop by, but I talked to him and Mike for the liner notes for the Fillmore set, which is coming out, I guess, the next month. I mean, life goes on, and Ben's got small kids now. And Campbell's out with a little band, and there'll never be another Tom Petty, there'll never be another Heartbreakers, and that was a very, very deliberate choice by Tom. I just ran across, doing some research on one of these books I'm working on, some union contracts for Tom Petty solo sessions from before the first album. So Cordell, his producer manager, really didn't think the rock band thing was a great idea. They brought Mudcrutch out. Mudcrutch had their shot that broke up, and Cordell ran through these Hollywood recording sessions with sidemen. Campbell's on one of them, Ben's on a couple of them, but that's it. And, they discarded that. They weren't going to do that. That would have been the easy thing to do. But Petty was convinced that the only way he wanted to move forward was in this group situation. And that's what made the Heartbreakers as unique as they were, is that they were a rock group. And that was a collaborative aesthetic that carried through the whole thing. Even if you look at the Petty solo albums, I mean, he collaborates with Jeff Lynne on both those, and all the other guys from the Heartbreakers are his sidemen. He doesn't, he's not hiring Dean Parks, but Dean Parks was on those sessions that I was talking about. Anyway, I'm glad to be here, Megan. Good luck with your book. We can't have too much out there about Tom Petty. He really, I think he's through being underrated now.
Thank you so much, Joel. You are a treasure trove of oral history, live performance information. Your memoirs are going to be 8 million pages long, good sir. I mean, even with the wealth of review material and biographical material that you've published in articles and in books over the years, I know that you have so much more stockpiled away to give to us. And I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about kind of how that relates to what Daniel was saying, this idea that nothing music is ever truly lost. Somebody was there at the show who can still talk about it. Somebody saw the original draft of the notes, or the first time there was a demo in the studio. Somebody has those tapes. Somebody saw that show, and it doesn't go away as long as we keep reflecting on it and talking about it. So thank you so much for your contribution today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
All right. So I guess Crystal's not with us, but maybe she'll still join us. And I'll go ahead if she joins us while I am talking. All right. So let me change the view of this thing. I have discovered that this recording thing, if I set it on the speaker, it will show whoever spoke last and never me, because I'm the host. So I'm switching now to a gallery view, and that's just how the recording is going to look, Megan. Thank you for including me on this. This is it's historic because it's absolutely the first time I have done anything on an AIPCT program except introduce it, which I intended never to do anything because there's something creepy about promoting one's own work with one's institute, if you know what I mean. There's just something creepy about that. But I'm not promoting my work, I'm promoting yours. And so I think that's probably going to be all right. I've never met Megan in person, although we were supposed to a couple of times. COVID has gotten in our way, among other things. But I got to know her, Joel, the same way you did, which is she wrote a review of one of my books, the best review I ever got, for sure, of my rock and roll book called Metaphysical Graffiti. And then she wrote, I wrote to her thanking her for the review because it was so, she understood what I was doing. And that I didn't expect anybody to understand what I was doing. And so anyway, but then she wrote me back like 3 months later and she said, if you pitched to Open Court that we do Tom Petty and philosophy, would they do it? And I said, I think they would if I pitch it and agree to do it. And she said, I'll do all the heavy lifting. I'll do the heavy lifting. But part of it is, it's exactly what both of you guys, both Daniel and Joel, are talking about. There is such depth in these lyrics, but they don't look like philosophy. That Petty's ability to say so much in so few words, and academics who always have their heads up their asses are going to take a look at Tom Petty and say, no, this guy's not a philosopher. Well, he's not a philosopher, but he's a poet of extraordinary ability, precisely because of the simplicity of expression he can achieve without sacrificing the complexity of the idea. So anyway, one of the things I love about the way Megan does what she does is that she always numbers things and then tells you exactly what's going to happen and gives you the numbers as they happen. So that's the way I have put together what I have for today. I have a prelude of 1 sentence. I have 4 outline points, all of them short, but under the first 3, there's an A, a B, and a C. And then the 4th one is not. I call it Straight into Darkness, a meditation on time and simplicity. And this is, I'm going to talk about Megan's ideas and Tom Petty's ideas, but this is more a meditation in the presence of this book than a review of the book is kind of, and so, you know, the way that Megan indicated that meditation was probably what we're going to get from Tom Petty if we get anything in the way of a spirituality or a higher spirituality. I thought, now what we need to do is a meditation. And particularly on time and simplicity. Time is my specialty as a philosopher. I'm a philosophy and communication studies professor at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. And among the things I do is I write on pop culture, which until pretty recently was a very controversial thing for an academic philosopher to do, and I didn't care. I got a fair number of sideways glances over the course of my career, and I still don't care. All right, so Prelude. This is a meditation inspired by Megan's book, which led me to think about many things I hadn't considered before, especially regarding Tom Petty, but there were actually some things, some philosophical ideas I hadn't considered before. 1, I've spent a lot of time thinking about darkness, so much so that I developed a theory of darkness, which Megan has heard, but I won't plague you with it. Just these points. A, the Romantic poets got the idea that our quest in life was to break free of the bodily prison, and then our souls would hover free, truly free for the first time, and go either toward the light or toward the darkness. For these Romantic poets, and Schiller is the main one I have in mind, the freedom to choose the dark was the interesting moment. B, neither Tom Petty nor I would think of the body as a prison of the soul, and neither of us could be called romantic, but we always need to remember that Tom Petty was a poet. Now, there is an ecstasis, a standing outside of oneself or standing beside oneself. There's an ecstasis in poetizing, even if your body isn't exactly a prison. There's a standing outside of your perspective. There's a standing outside of your body that you experience in poetizing. I think this song, Straight into Darkness, is about ecstasis, but it's temporal ecstasis and its limits. Temporal ecstasis, standing outside of your current time, as opposed to standing outside of your current body. C, I note that the inspiration for the book arises from a moment in Megan's history when the body did feel like a prison for her, although she doesn't burden us with the intimate details. Sometimes we want to break free and we're just not sure how to do it. Maybe it is free falling, or maybe we are learning to fly into the great wide open. It doesn't feel quite right to me to call this transcendence, this urge to break free. And I don't think that's what it is for Petty. It certainly isn't for me. Megan suggests that this is about embracing radical uncertainty. This is in her mysticism chapter. Embracing radical uncertainty, in particular, she was talking about Tom Petty trying to figure out why someone burned his house down this is the moment when, and then he sort of comes to the conclusion, I can't ever know this. This is not the kind of thing that I can know. So embracing radical uncertainty in her mysticism chapter comes out. And this seems right to me. This is the kind of getting outside of ourselves that Tom Petty is good at, is embracing radical uncertainty. 2, but I think that the image of the darkness and the night in this song is in every case about the future. So it's temporal uncertainty. This is where the radical uncertainty in all three verses focuses. The darkness or the night is the future. It means more than that, but it always means at least that. It's always about the future in all three verses. I say verses, I mean choruses. Well, the way that the verses go into the choruses, the thing Daniel was talking about, the first two times it says we went, and the last time it doesn't say that. And Megan makes this point and makes a lot of this point in her book. And I think it's incredibly important, but it's still the future in all three cases. And so the thing that varies in each one of these iterations is the group facing it. In every case, it's an us. So it's never just about Petty. It's an us, but the group grows from a pair of radically uncertain people to a band of radically uncertain people to half the human race of radically uncertain but strong people, because the weak fall away, right? So it's those among us who are strong. That growth of perspective from the two to the small group to half the human race, that growth of perspective has an interesting balance and proportion built into it. It's a beautiful dialectic of stability and precariousness, to use John Dewey's terms. The stable element is our radical uncertainty, because it's always there. So no matter who we are, no matter when we are, and no matter how strong we are, we're all radically uncertain in every circumstance. That's what the future does to you. That uncertainty can be embraced. And the argument, I think that's the argument of Megan's mysticism chapter.
Yeah.
It is, after all, somebody needs to mute, who isn't muted. It is, after all, predictable that we will remain radically uncertain, except for Pigpen, because that fucker knows, right? Right. So, and now, presumably Tom Petty too. But the precariousness is that we don't want to do this. We don't want to remain radically uncertain. And so we fight it. And that includes Tom Petty. He's fighting the radical uncertainty, trying to embrace it. It's not easy. B, of course, Megan chooses Camus as the Archimedean fulcrum of this story, and Camus places suicide at that point of contact with the real. One could say that it is a commitment to the darkness, in the sense of the future that may be no future, or maybe it is, but we will never know. And this led me to consider whether Tom Petty had in fact committed suicide. There was a thought I had never had before. I don't mean intentionally. It looks like from context we can rule that out. He had been through far rougher patches and always found a reason to push the stone back up the hill. The suicide in this case was a struggle with his own self-destructive tendencies. 3, our inability to know or control the future drives us batty. Even if we embrace radical uncertainty in general, there are specific things we really have to know, like how to make the next record truly great without repeating ourselves. Megan talks a good bit about this. It was like existential for Tom Petty that the next record had to be better than the last one, and he couldn't repeat himself. And so his ability to control the future was limited by his creative powers. And in his judgment, at least at the time, the album Long After Dark did not succeed in this regard. But it's part of the struggle with the radical uncertainty that one must control this thing that is so important to oneself. So what I want you to do is I want you to draw that analogy into your own life, whatever it is that you struggle to control, but you know that you can't. But it's too vitally important to you to not struggle against it. And so that gets us into this sort of Sisyphean situation that Megan talks about. When you can't control what you feel you must control, you intensify the darkness. Think about that. So here you are struggling. You know you can't know it. You know you can't control it, but you must control it. And what this does is it intensifies the darkness. So you scream at it, you challenge it, And when the darkness just sits there, being dark and more intensely dark, the more you struggle, you turn against yourself. You will show that puny darkness what strength is. You will show the darkness. And so you destroy a little bit of yourself to prove to the darkness that it can't have you whole and intact. This, I think, might be the essence of Camus' point about suicide. So, C, I think Megan's message, in part at least, is that we are all committing suicide, but we aren't doing it equally well. And so my question to her for today is whether she thinks Tom Petty committed suicide well, and what advice she has for us so that we can do it well, even if he perhaps let suicide commit him rather than the other way around. 4, this is short. There's nothing simple about simplicity. This struggle is complex. In fact, it's infinitely complex, because the more you struggle, the more you intensify the darkness. Right? There's nothing simple about this struggle, and finding a way to get it simple into a song, it's just as Daniel said, it's an art of very high order. So to get things down to the bone is among the toughest assignments that a poet can take on or be given. I know of no one who mastered simplicity of expression musically and lyrically without sacrificing any of the real complexity of our existential dilemma better than Tom Petty. He's better at it than Springsteen. And Springsteen has this same gift, but he doesn't have it in the same measure that Tom Petty has it. This power of simplifying the complex without in any way losing the complexity. That's Tom Petty's real gift as a poet. And that's what I have to say today. So thanks.
Yeah, Randy, that was awesome. I love it. We got artistic perspective, historical perspective, philosophy perspective. We have it all. We have something for everyone here. It's killer.
So my question, what are you going to do? How do we suicide well?
Something that I have often thought about with regard to the way that I care about Petty, the way that he influences my ability to think about difficult situations. The positive elements of that are all present in the book, but there is a shadow over them cast by the idea that Petty basically was a workaholic. And so, when we talk about being a happy Sisyphus in a negative light, when we, criticize neoliberal capitalism on a broader scale, what we are always concerned about is the place when working hard becomes working too hard. And we only ever seem to know about that after the fact, to many of your points about time. And so on the front, his hip was already fractured by the time the tour began, and he knew that. He knew there was a hairline crack there, and I'm sure that there were many conversations had about, like, Tom, do you think you can do it? Do you want to try to do it? What kind of meds is it going to take to do it? Like, he had all these accommodations. He rode around backstage in a golf cart where normally he would walk around those parts of the stage, and that was not easy at venues like Red Rocks. To get those golf carts to go those places was a challenge, so, like, obviously he was incredibly aware the entire time of needing to manage the intense physical pain that he was in. And the tour was amazing. It was amazing. But to Joel's point, a lot of the reviews were like, he looks sick. Something is wrong. Something is off. He looks old for the first time, and now, you look back in light of his death immediately following the end of that tour, and how can you say that it was justified? But on the other hand, how can you say it was not justified? So it is a real predicament. It is a real predicament there, as far as, like, was he too much of a workaholic? Can we hold up how hard he worked as something we should emulate, but at the same time maybe do better than him? but we can only ever know in retrospect. Each of us has to take the gamble. We can only ever know in retrospect whether working too hard paid off enough to make it worthwhile to work that hard.
Well, at least Tom wanted to. Jerry Garcia, his band drove him to death.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point of comparison, definitely. I don't think Ben and Mike were sitting around being like, Tom, you really got to just suck it up, buddy.
So you think he did commit suicide? Well, I think what Camus would say is he chose it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about generalized suicide, not specific suicide,
Right.
Right. And so at some level, he must have known that this tour was going to kill him, and he chose it anyway. Right.
Yeah, I'm sure he knew that he would need more serious rest and recovery after than if he had just got the surgery whenever he needed it in the first place.
So your estimation of why he's of his mode of self-destructiveness is workaholic.
Yeah, he believed in the payoff, right? He thought that the tour would be so. What's that, Joel?
You already mentioned his years on heroin, and fentanyl is just, the world's new heroin. So his entire judgment and everything was affected by his drug addiction. And they say, well, the pain occasioned his drug addiction. Complicated issue.
Yeah, very much so.
There's people in NA that would do anything to take pain medication, but don't.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to think that they would ask him questions about that before the tour got started. But yeah, I mean, maybe his belief in himself in that regard was misguided. Maybe he thought he could handle it more easily than he could have. At some point, we all climb the mountain for the last time, right? But we never know it's the last time while we're doing it, for the most part.
There's the radical uncertainty.
Yeah.
But in a way, going on the tour was embracing that, right? So, like that,
the chance of it, the gamble of it. He always believed that the payoff would be his.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it was. It was a great tour. I built a whole book around it. I feel great about it. But at the same time, man, I'll never get to see him on tour again. That's terrible.
I think you got it right. I think your answer is right. Insofar as there are right answers in philosophy, that's the thing to say, is to say happy Sisyphus. Well, I mean, can Sisyphus really be happy? But I don't feel like in this book that you didn't spare us the sort of, well, it's like you said, there are people who are not going to like this book because of it's a new way of handling this, and you almost seem ambivalent about ultimate things in the book. I mean, or casual about ultimate things. But Tom Petty was casual about ultimate things, even though he knew they were ultimate. Right?
He believed, look, outside of the methodology, which is work all the time, work when you feel it, work when you don't feel it. Outside of the methodology part, the attitude part is the other thing where Petty and I'm very inspired by him. His idea that we should stay ornery, that we should never be without scorn, as Camus said, he was all for that. He still thought of himself kind of as a punk and was still not willing to pick fights as much, as willing to pick fights, but not as angry about picking fights as he was when he was maybe a little younger. Like he still was willing to pass judgment and stand firm in boundaries that were on the basis of that judgment, but he wasn't as willing to like punch walls or pull out switchblades in the boardroom at RCA or whatever as he was back in the day. So he became more mellow, but he also still never lost that ornery edge that he had. That he was willing to call things out and be confrontational, I think is the other part involved in the happiness.
Well, he called himself out on the Confederate flag. I see why you didn't talk about that in the book, because it's just a different subject altogether. Of course, it comes up in the book that we edited, but I have always been curious about your view about his rather explicit and repeated apologies for having done a tour with a Confederate flag as the backdrop.
Yeah. I live in Georgia, There's a lot of Confederate flags around me, although I live in a major metro area. You know, they're not here in Atlanta, but they're a 20-minute
Roswell.
drive.
Yeah,
They're a
not
20-minute
far.
drive. Yeah. So, I mean, am I a fan of the Confederate flag? No. Do I want to see it at concerts? No. Was I a fan of Tom Petty's apologist attitude after the fact? Kind of. I thought that's a nice gesture. We don't need to evaluate the sincerity of it too deeply. Here's what I really enjoyed about his decision to call himself out on that when nobody else had called him out on it. The fact that he knew it was going to make certain segments of his fan base pissed off, and he did it anyway. That to me is impressive, you know. I don't see Springsteen wanting to do anything that would alienate his fans at this point. You know, I don't see, that's the nearest case that I can think of, really. You know, rock and rollers who are willing to tell their fan base to fuck off, get educated, you know, that's impressive. I can't think of any parallel examples really to that, to him doing that. You know, like other rock and rollers will send maybe cease and desist letters to like Republican candidates who use their music for walk-on music that they don't like Aerosmith has done it a couple of times. I think Republicans know better than to use Springsteen's music for that, but maybe he'd be willing to do that. But you don't see major liberal rock and rollers with a conservative fan base sticking their neck out to anger their fan base. I can't think of anybody else who would do anything even remotely like that. So that was punk to me, extremely punk. I admired him.
By the way, the first instance I'm aware of a rock and roller doing what you're talking about was Bruce Springsteen warning the Ronald Reagan campaign not to use "Born in the USA." And the letter is hilarious because it includes the question, have you actually ever looked at the lyrics of this song? So,
yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. All right, we should throw it open to anybody else who's joined us who has comments or questions for Megan.
Well, I would just say, Megan, don't lose hope. You will see Tom Petty again. There'll be a hologram tour.
I went to the Buddy Holly Roy Orbison show.
How was that? How was that, Joel? Is it good?
I wouldn't recommend it. It had about 45 seconds of incredible mirth, and then I got bored by the third song. So, you know, but I had to go.
Yeah.
Other questions for Megan?
I have an observation as somebody who is 10 times more ignorant in music than Socrates claimed to be at every time. I have learned so much and now have an appreciation for Petty and his philosophical dilemma of darkness. I really do appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Megan has a lot to say about the darkness issue because it comes up over and over in Petty's stuff. You know.
I thought you were just going to stop it. I have a lot to say about the darkness issue, and I was going to be fine with that assessment as well.
I have a question and a comment and a couple of things, and thank you for being from Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta right now. Yes, I went to Mays High School, Morehouse, all of that kind of stuff. So right here in the center, Southwest Atlanta. So my comment first would be that I think Huey Newton in some ways helps us out in his idea of revolutionary suicide. And so, you know, this idea that we can't get out of suicide and we only have these two choices, reactionary and revolutionary. And so in that way, you know, I think that, you know, Petty's on the side of revolutionary suicide. You know, I mean, we're not going to get out of this thing alive anyway. So, yeah, you know, you might well give yourself to some kind of cause. And I think he gives himself to the cause. And in the same way, ironically, Prince, who actually has a video, there's a YouTube video with Prince playing with Petty. You know, he comes back to Atlanta, does that last show. I was at the last show, the last time, and so the 10 o'clock, I think it was the 10 o'clock show or whatever, and then he goes back and dies the next morning, and I don't think he would have given that up, And then also the other thing that I before I get to my question, another philosopher friend of mine who is actually in literature at Pittsburgh, Mike Sawyer, one of the things he talks about is this idea that no person is infinitely creative, right? And so it's an uphill battle whenever you decide that you're going to make new music and you can't repeat yourself. That seems to be, that's, it's already a kind of a flawed kind of a thing. It's the kind of Nietzschean kind of battle also. This is gonna happen. My question is this. So I kind of come into Tom Petty early on. For me, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. My brother introduced me to Tom Petty, and he kind of heard about Tom Petty through Alvin and the Chipmunks, which is really interesting. They did one of his songs, right? And so then there was the video, where he finds the guitar in the cave or whatever. I can't think of the name of the video right now, but and so we really got into Tom Petty. And one of the things I've always loved to do is to be in a elevator full of white people and have Free Falling playing. I'm free, and have to come on. I'm free as my ringer. So that was my ringtone for years. But my question is, so there's this a natural comparison between Tom Petty and War, right? They both have a song, "Slipping in the Darkness," and War's song, so War is more of a, hey, we're gonna make this really sad musically, right? So the song doesn't have that many words. They repeat themselves over and over again, and it's very bluesy and things of that nature, and it makes you want to cut your heart out. Right. I've always found that Tom Petty has a way of writing a song that is dark, but it sounds happy. Right. It's not as, and I can't get around it. So I was wondering, is that almost intentional for him? I mean, Free Falling could be a sad song, but it's kind of happy. I like it. Right. But when you listen to War, Slipping in the Darkness, it's meant to be a dark song, right? You need a drink. When they're drinking in the song, you need to drink with the song, right? And I'm wondering, is that something that that Tom tried to do on purpose? And I'm wondering, in some ways, not to turn everything into race, but is that some way some of the whiteness of the song? Even though he creates a group, but there's a way in which his darkness, he can fix it if he can fix a couple of these problems. Whereas kind of a blues lick, you can't fix. There's no fix for it. So I was just wondering about that.
No, I mean, they're both ultimately grappling with the same problems, but there's definitely a sort of like, let me just denigrate it to the maximum and say worst case scenario. Let me just say a kind of redneck resilience on display there, a kind of like hillbilly excellence on display there, right? The idea that like, no, my scorn, my fierceness comes from a place of like, how are you going to tell me that? You cannot say boo to me about anything. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, my dad cannot tell me that. No boss on no job is going to tell me that. I'm going to own my own music. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. It happens to hit the top 40, which is incredible. Same way it did for Prince. It happened to hit the top 40, and that is incredible. That their musicianship was recognized by a broader audience is kind of amazing, because they really did it their own way, and that doesn't happen hardly ever. Even in the time when they became famous, even in the time when they found a way to ride that wave of popularity, that was still rare at the time. So yeah, it definitely has to do with race. I don't know if you've ever been to a Tom Petty show that wasn't a part of a bigger festival, Bill.
No.
But normally I can count on one hand the number of Black people that are present at those shows. That's not an accident.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think Tom probably wishes his audience was more diverse than it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think probably sometimes because they were so like Benmont in particular is gifted with other forms of music besides rock and roll, but really most of the band is gifted with Scott Thurston played keyboards for Iggy Pop for a decade before, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, he's seen other types of audiences definitely than the Tom Petty type of crowd. But so there is something there, and it is something that is not widely discussed, except in the case of like, his apologist decision to deal with the flag on the tour and stuff like that. you know?
Yeah, because he
Um,
manages the bluesy sound. The only concert I've been to like a Tom Petty, and I don't want to put them on the same category, but I went to a Leonard Skinner concert in the early 90s, right? And it's a similar crowd, right? And it was interesting for me because there is a difference in white concerts and black concerts. In one concert years ago, there was this talk about rap concerts. So I said, my friend said he had tickets to Leonard Skinner. Let me go. I like Free Bird. Let me go and hear the song. And white people were high before the concert, right? There were people, we were stepping over bodies. I was like, somebody needs to get the paramedics down here. I've never seen this before. And, in a black concert, people are high like that after the concert. Right? They're falling out after the concert. So that was the huge difference for me. But I'd never seen that before. But that bluesy kind of sound, is in Tom Petty's. I think he could have crossed over, but I think the one thing is his songs, even though they're dark, they still almost have this almost happiness to them.
Yeah. There's a chapter in the book that discusses whether this particular song, Straight into Darkness, is a ballad or an anthem. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, a lot of that is just, I know it when I see it, right? Some of it we can say like, oh, this tempo or that tempo, this or that beat structure or rhythmic pattern in the lyrics that are chosen. But ultimately also it's just like a vibe in the crowd. Does the crowd take this moment to go to the restroom, or does the crowd get on their feet and put their hands in the air? Like the song could be the same in both cases. Benmont talks about in the playback liner notes, Benmont is quoted as saying like that they couldn't even play Straight into Darkness in Europe because fights would break out, and no one understood why fights kept breaking out during the song. But it's like kind of a slow song and the message is not very fighty. So I don't know what that's about. I don't know what that's about.
Those Europeans.
But there's something going on in the audience. And this idea, I do think, it's not discussed as an explicit kind of intersection with a critical race conversation, but there's a whole chapter on the violence of Tom Petty's crowds, and we can't just not talk about how his crowds are mostly men and mostly white. I guess we can't just not talk about that. So it does seem clearly related.
But I'm glad he does take himself to task. One of my favorite guitar players of modern times would be, and don't throw rocks at me for saying this, would be Kid Rock, right? But when he had a chance to say something about the Confederate flag, he says, well, I'm not a racist. How can I be? My son is black. That was the dumbest answer he could have actually said, right? Slave owners has black children, right? So he could have gone a lot of different ways, and he chose to go that direction. So I'm glad Tom Petty did do that,
Yeah, he was willing to always stand on the side of what he thought was the good and the right and the just, even if it offended his audience, even if it offended his record company. He was happy to like draw the line somewhere.
In some ways, though, what you said earlier about the sort of hillbilly, you can't tell me what to do, because he had the audience he had, they would respect him for disagreeing with them. It's because we wouldn't presume to tell you what to do, Tom, and we know that you're not telling us what to do.
Yeah.
So we're buying the record.
It's a punk move. Which begs the question of the relationship between punk philosophy and oneness as well, though. I think that gets us deeper into exactly what this question is about, rather than like trying to get us out of it.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I didn't mention is my own introduction to Tom Petty was in the late 70s. I was playing in bands that were punk and new wave. And these genres were not well defined at that particular moment. And when Tom Petty showed up with American Girl and Breakdown, we weren't sure whether this was new wave or American Girl sounds punk. It sounds like a punk song if it's 1977. And you're looking for material to play, and you're thinking about your audience, as my bands always did. It's like, who are we trying to get to come to these things? Can we play Tom Petty? And for all of those bands except the hardcore punk band, the answer was yes, we can play Tom Petty. We just play it our way. So, you know, you can sort of adapt it. You play breakdown twice as fast as he does. Da-dum, 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 right? And you scream the lyrics and that sort of thing. And the first Tom Petty song I ever learned was I Need to Know, which frankly is a rocking, I mean, raucous song with this loud guitars screaming and you know the vocal is screaming. You could play that in a punk band, and we did. We punked it up just this much, but that's all you had to do. And so one of the things that was interesting to me was you could take the songs, not the attitude, not the way he delivered the songs, but you could take the songs themselves and you could move them just a little bit in their country and move them just a little bit in another direction in the punk, tighten up and play them staccato in their new wave. And I played in all of those bands. You know, you can, I've played in any number of country bands. You can play Tom Petty in the country band. And everybody, yeah, it works. It works even better than Tom Petty punk is Tom Petty country. I think, and in some ways, but notice, you could also do it, Anthony, soul music. There's no question you can adapt Tom Petty's songs. You just deliver them a little bit differently and they could be soul music. I mean, imagine Prince doing a Tom Petty song. There's no reason why not. And so one of the things I'm thinking,
Randall, it's amazing how few Tom Petty songs are covered.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. That I'm fascinated by philosophy of covers just overall, like what covers Tom Petty chose to do, songs that he did that seemed like he really just badly wanted to cover us, like Little Bit of Soul. His Little Bit of Soul song is like a dead ringer for the original Little Bit of Soul, but like I mean it's incredible to me how close he clearly just wanted to do covers of that song. He wished he had wrote it, and so he wrote something that was like 15% different from it, you know, just so that he could have it his way for all eternity, you know, which is great. But I wish there were more people that would cover Tom Petty songs. I was doing podcast interview for the Tom Petty project last week, or maybe that was earlier this week. It's been a strange month. And one of the questions that they asked me in like a rapid fire thing was, who would I want to see do a cover of Tom Petty and what song would it be? And I didn't have any clue about what's I would want it to be, but I said just women. And it seems like Adria Petty is doing a good job of kind of putting that gaze, that more feminist gaze on like a lot of the videos that are now, that she who's doing the bulk of the thinking, I think, about what the direction of the legacy is going to be. And so her work in production has caused all these really interesting videos to come out from Tom Petty, you know, that she has directed and sort of ideated. And I think those are turning out beautifully. And I would like to see the same done for there's already so many kind of unauthorized or lightly authorized cover. There's a bluegrass Pickin' on Petty album. There's a lullaby for babies with no words whatsoever album, just like ambient elevator type music versions. There's tree versions. There's punk rock versions. There's full albums with bands wanting to do these. And I would love to see like an all female cover album. But the number one artist I said I would like to see do it is St. Vincent. I think Annie Clark would be a cool choice for that. I'm always interested in her takes. She's done some really innovative covers of 70s kind of iconic songs, rock songs. And I think she would be a great choice too. But so I hope there's more of that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have achieved this. We're 6 minutes to the end mark. So we've got 6 more minutes. Who has been holding a question or a comment and now really wants to release it into the universe? Wait a minute, Joel's going to show us something. Megan, is that flea over your right shoulder?
Flea?
Flea.
No. That's a signed Depot Street single from Mudcrutch from back in the day. That's incredible.
Yeah,
Pretty
there
good
you
record.
go.
I like Wild Eyes a lot.
Yeah. I saw Mudcrutch on the reunion tour and it was amazing. And it was also one of the scariest and most violent concert going experiences I have had. That story is recorded in this book. I just encountered a very drug-addled audience member who was like prepared to do serious damage to me. But here I am unscathed.
The Fillmore gigs were a hot box. I
Yeah.
think everybody there smoked 2 or 3 joints during the show. And when he got to that point in his lyrics where he said that he was going to roll another joint, the whole place lit up. I mean, there were just matches all over the hall. Also, somebody set off a pepper spray one night.
Yeah, that incident is recorded in the book as well.
It's amazing. I was up in the balcony. I had no idea how strong pepper spray was. I mean, just all of a sudden there was just this empty space in the floor. And they had to clear the place out, air it out, and everybody came back. 45-minute break. And Petticut walks back on stage and goes, "Well, that was gas."
He liked a good dumb dad joke. He really did. After it rained at the last Red Rocks show that he ever did, it poured rain. They had to quit 15 minutes. They came in, covered everything with tarps, and just as soon as they had the tarp stopped and everybody had to go back in. But as he's shuffling back in, he comes, the first thing he says in the mic is, "Better safe than sorry." he just really loved those little like naggy parental type things. That was hilarious to him to just be parental and responsible for a minute. He got such a big kick out of impersonating responsible people sometimes. Even as he was so genuinely responsible for his band and his family, a lot riding on the guy. No more questions?
I guess we're done.
Prince,
And Daniel, final word? Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about Prince for a second, who's my favorite artist of all time. Here's my shrine to Prince. Can you see me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. See, there you go.
Votive candle. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. He's when I was talking about earlier about songwriting and about how small changes in a song can make such a huge difference, I was really thinking a lot about Prince, because one of the things that I always notice with Prince, going through all his songs, is that he will make these changes in the song that are just very similar to what Petty does, where it's a few words will be dropped that is just so drastic. The most obvious example is Creep. He takes it and he makes it, like I'm just like, he flips the perspective, so it's like, like you think you're special, I think you're special, and then maybe I'm just a creep. All that, it all just goes back on him in this really incredible moment where he's like, he goes out to the crowd, with his arms. I think you're special, and then maybe I'm just a creep. All that energy just goes back right into him. It's painful to see. Or like Joni Mitchell, he does a case of you, but he doesn't say I could drink a case of you. He says I drink a case of you. So it becomes this magical thing almost. And like I think both Prince and Petty, as writers who are they both really understand how those little differences can make such a really just incredibly profound difference. How taking one word out of the song changes it from this hypothetical thing to this world where reality is like a little bit bent. It was so cool that you brought up Prince, because when I was talking about him, I had him in mind as well.
It sounds to me
Sue
like
was a
Daniel
workhorse and workaholic.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like Daniel is daring you to write a book on Prince.
Oh, there are so many people that have done it better than me already. Prince has no shortage of people wanting to publish about him. I don't know. All the petty heads they're not getting with it.
Well, I remember when I told you this, when we proposed the Tom Petty book, that I had the hardest time convincing Open Court to do Jimmy Buffett. for similar reasons that they objected to Tom Petty. It's because they're not listening. they don't know what's going on in these songs. What they know is the image, and the image is not exactly of a philosopher, right? But the thing I said to him with Jimmy Buffett is, you need to sit down and look at these lyrics and not judge the quality of these songs on the basis of parrot head behavior. And of course, it's similar with Petty's audience. But what I always found is that Jimmy Buffett's audience tends to be pretty smart. And so does Tom Petty's audience tend to be pretty smart. If they don't look smart, they are. So anyway, yeah, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, we're out of time. And now I've given myself the last word, so I shouldn't do that. Megan, thank you.
Thank all of you for being here and for caring to contemplate these issues and to keep telling the stories about how this man's music has affected you, because that's the only way we can keep it alive, you know, is by showing that we think it's important enough to be kept alive.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank everybody. Watch the AIPCT website and Facebook page for upcoming events. The next thing I know about is September I believe it's the 24th. There'll be a residency lecture on Herman Melville by Mikołaj Wiśniewski, my visiting fellow from Poland this month. So you'll get information about that. So thanks everybody.